One of my favorite zoologist perfumes smelled like flower, fruit, honey, cream, and a tiny little bird flying through spring, and that is Hummingbird. And to be honest, if we only look at the note list or if we only follow the usual gendered imagination around perfume, then this fragrance may not seem like the most obvious fit for a man in his 40s. And Hummingbird is floral and fruity. It is a tiny bird moving through flowers in spring. It is very bright, sweet, and it even has a very obvious girlish quality. But I truly love it because it brings me back to a long-lasting world of lightness, a world where floral and fruity smells can still bring direct joy, where sweetness has not yet been suspected of being cheap, and where brightness does not need to be mocked as childish. So let me give it a try. So first of all, it does not win through strangeness, animalic intensity, or narrative shock. Instead, it translates the movement, color, and spring-like feeling of a hummingbird into a light, sweet explosion of flowers and fruits. Hummingbird does not smell like nature in the soil, among branches and leaves, or inside a truly realistic garden. It smells like nature beautified through a sunlight filter. There is no obvious humus, animalic dirtiness, or the kind of cruelty found in many zoologist fragrances, where nature is revealed as not necessarily gentle. It is more like spring turned into a coming-of-age film. The fruits ripen at exactly the right moment, and honey and cream appear only with a very gentle touch. So its nature is not a documentary-like nature, but illustrated nature, a fairy tale type of nature. A hummingbird is not an animal that stays on one flower and slowly gathers nectar. Its defining qualities are speed, shimmer, lightness, and constant movement. The opening of this fragrance has that same feeling of flying back and forth. It is not a bouquet, but a fragmented spring glimpsed by a hummingbird darting quickly through flowers. A lot of sweet, girlish perfumes derive their sweetness from candy, from caramel, vanilla, or marshmallow, which can easily become the cloying sweetness of commercial fragrances. But the sweetness of hummingbird feels more like the combined sweetness of nectar, ripe fruits, honey, and cream. And later, this whipped cream and musk gather everything into a soft, skin-like texture. I'd like to talk about the kind of girlishness and purity that hummingbird creates. Of course, I must emphasize that I do not understand this feeling as an age category, and I do not simply understand it as a cute and sweet style. In perfume, it is more like a constructed state of perception, bright, unpolluted, not yet weighed down by tons of experience, and still sensorially open to our world. This is exactly where hummingbird succeeds. It does not simply pile flowers, fruits, honey, and cream into a very high degree of sweetness. It organizes sweetness into a kind of spring that has not yet been damaged. Philosophically speaking, girlish can first be understood as a state of perceptual beginning. It does not mean the wearer has to be girlish. Rather, the scent itself creates the condition of seeing the world for the first time. Many mature perfumes emphasize complexity, shadows, leather, tobacco, soil, animalic notes, or the smell of decay. as if beauty must pass through the sediment of experience, pain, time, and history. Hummingbird does the opposite. It reduces the world back to flower, fruits, honey, sunlight, and cream. This reduction does not mean shallowness. Instead, it temporarily removes the heaviness of the real world and allows us to re-enter a world where color has not yet darkened and the senses have not yet grown tired. It smells like a person who still believes in spring and still believes that flowers and fruits can bring immediate joy. The sense of purity here is also not purity in the moral sense. It is not ignorance, obedience, and it is definitely not the traditional idealization of the female body. More accurately, it is an olfactory structure that has not been invaded by dirtiness. In perfume, the dirtiness often comes from animalic notes, smoke, damp woods, spicy, leather, or overly heavy powdery textures. Hummingbird avoids almost all of these directions. Its flowers and fruits are very bright. Its honey is golden. Its cream is soft. Its musk is close to the skin but not carnal. It does not turn the body into an object of desire. The girlish quality of hummingbird works in the same way. This is not a strongly seductive perfume, not a fragrance designed to create sexiness. It is more like a scent that lets you joyfully look at a spring scene. When you smell it, your first thought is not this person is dangerous, or this person is sexy, or this person is expensive. Instead, it is, oh, the world is so bright. But from another perspective, this kind of girlishness also carries a risk. Girlishness can easily become flattened, too sweet, too pretty, too conflict-free, and it turns into the familiar pretty girl template of commercial perfumery. Whether hummingbird succeeds depends on whether it can escape this trap. And I think it does. It is successful because its sweetness is not a single candy-like sweetness, but a sweetness with movement and layers. The flower and fruits in the opening, they're not statically arranged. Instead, they keep flashing and shifting, like the flight of a hummingbird. You smell pear, cherry, nectar, white flowers, purple flowers, and honey, but they are not quietly lining up one after another. They overlap and cross into each other. They create a very dazzling atmosphere about the spring. And later, cream and musk gather this flickering movement into something softer, transforming it from a visual garden into a tactile skin impression. So the olfactory logic of this perfume is not what does the hummingbird smells like, but if you become a hummingbird, what would the world smells like? So this is a very interesting perspective, and it makes hummingbird feel especially light within the zoologist line. Society often defines maturity as heaviness, restraint, hardness, rationality, and a certain bitterness, as if the more mature a person becomes, the further they should move away from sweetness, from flowers, softness, and brightness. But this is actually a very narrow idea of maturity. Real maturity does not necessarily mean rejecting lightness. It can mean knowing very well that the world is not always bright, while still being willing to preserve one's ability to feel brightness. And for me, hummingbird is exactly that. It briefly brings me back to a long-lost world that is light, bright, and full of spring. Okay, that's my thoughts on Hummingbird from Zoologist. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.